-69, and counting. Hugh, rusted heating pipes festooned with cobwebs, crawled lazily all over the ceiling. When the furnace kicked on suddenly, Richards almost screamed in terror. The surge of adrenaline to his limbs and heart was painful. For a moment, almost incapacitating. There were newspapers here too, Richard saw, thousands of them, stacked up and tied with string. The rats nested in them by the thousands. Whole families stared out at the interloper with ruby, distrustful eyes. He began to walk away from the elevator, pausing halfway across the cracked cement floor. There was a large fuse box bolted to a supporting post, and behind it, leaning on the other side, a litter of tools. Richards took the crowbar and continued to walk, keeping his eyes on the floor. Near the far wall, he spied the main storm drain. To his left, he walked over and looked at it, wondering in the back of his mind if they knew he was down here yet. The storm drain was constructed of vented steel. It was about 3 feet across, and on the far side there was a slot for the crowbar. Richard slipped it in, levered up the cover, and then put one foot on the crowbar to hold it. He got his hands under the lip of the cover and pushed it over. It fell to the cement with a clang that made the rat squeak with dismay. The pipe beneath slanted down at a 45-degree angle, and Richards guessed that its bore could be no more than 2.5 feet. It was very dark. Claustrophobia suddenly filled his mouth with flannel. Too small to maneuver in, almost too small to breathe in, but it had to be. He turned the storm drain cover back over and edged it toward the pipe entrance. Just enough that he could get a grip from beneath it once he was down there. Then he walked over to the fuse box, hammered the padlock off with the crowbar, and shoved it open. He was about to begin pulling fuses when another idea occurred to him. He walked over to the newspapers, which lay in dirty yellow drifts against the whole eastern length of the cellar. He ferreted out the folded and dog-eared book of matches and began lighting his book of matches he had been lighting his smokes with. There were 3 left. He yanked out a sheet of paper and formed it into a spill, held it under his arm like a dunce cap, and lit a match. The first one guttered out in the draught. The second one fell off his trembling hand and hissed out on the damp concrete. The third stayed alight. He held it to the yellow paper spill, and the flame bloomed. A rat, sensing what was to come, ran across his foot and into the darkness. A sense of terrible urgency filled him now, and yet he waited until the spill was flaming a foot high. He had no more matches. Carefully, he tucked it into a fissure in the chest-high paper wall and waited until he saw the fire was spreading. The huge oil tank which serviced the Y was built into the adjoining wall. Perhaps it would blow. Richard thought it would. Trotting now, he went back to the fuse box and began ripping out the long, tubular fuses. He got most of them before the basement lights went out. He felt his way across to the storm drain, aided by the growing, flickering light of the burning papers. He sat down with his feet dangling, then slowly eased in. When his head was below the level of the floor, he pressed his knees against the sides of the pipe to hold himself steady, and worked his arms up over his head. It was slow work. There was very little room to move. The light of the fire was a brilliant yellow now, and the crackling sound of burning filled his ears. Then his groping fingers found the lip of the drain, and he slid them up until they gripped the vent cover. He yanked it forward slowly, supporting more and more of the weight on the muscles on his back and neck. When he judged that it was over far enough, over the edge, and dropped into place, he gave one last fierce tug. The cover dropped into its place with a clang, bending both wrists back cruelly. Richards let his knees relax, and he slid downward like a boy shooting the chutes. The pipe was coated with slime. He slid effortlessly about 12 feet to where the pipe bent into a straight line. His feet struck smartly, and he stood there like a drunk, leaning against a lamppost. But he couldn't get into the horizontal pipe. The elbow bend was too sharp. The taste of claustrophobia became huge, gagging. Trapped, his mind babbled. Trapped in here. Trapped, trapped. A steel scream rose in his throat, and he choked it down. Calm down. Sure, it's very hackneyed, very trite, but we must be calm, very calm, because we're here at the bottom of this pipe, and we can't get up, and we can't get down, and if the fucking oil tank goes boom, and we're going to be fricasseed very neatly, and slowly he began to wiggle around until his chest was against the pipe instead of his back. The slime coating acted as a lubricant, helping his movement. It was very bright in the pipe now, and getting warmer. The vented cover threw prison bar shadows across his struggling face. Once leaning against his chest and belly and groin, with his knees bending the right way, he could slip down further, letting his calves and feet slide into the horizontal pipe until he was in the praying position. Still no good. His buttocks was pushed against the solid ceramic facing above the entrance to the horizontal pipe. Faintly, it seemed, he could hear shouting of commands above the heavy crackling of the fire, but it might have been his imagination, which was now strained and fevered beyond the point of trust. He began to flex the muscles in his thighs and calves in a tiring seesaw rhythm, and little by little his knees began to slide out from under him. He worked his hands up over his head again to give himself more room, and now his face lay solidly against the slime of the pipe. He was very close to fitting now. He swayed his back as much as he could and began to push with his arms and head. Push with his head? And the only things left in any position, or the only things left to give him any leverage. When he began to think that there was not enough room, that he was going to simply hang there, unable to move either way, his hips and buttocks suddenly popped through the horizontal pipe's opening like a champagne cork from a tight bottleneck. The small of his back scraped excruciatingly as his knees slid out from under him, and his shirt rucked up to his shoulder blades. Then he was in the horizontal pipe, except for his head and arms, which were bent back at uh, at a joint twisting angle. He wriggled the rest of the way in and paused there, panting, his face streaked with slime and wrap droppings, the skin of his lower back abraded and oozing blood. This pipe was narrower still. His shoulders scraped lightly on both sides, each time his chest rose in respiration. Thank God I'm underfed. Panting, he began to back into the unknown darkness of the pipe. -68, and counting. He made slow, mole-like progress for about 50 yards through the horizontal pipe, backing up blindly. Then the oil tank in the Y's basement suddenly blew with a roar that sent through pathetic vibrations in the pipe uh, to nearly rupture his eardrums. There was a yellow-white flash, as if the pipe of phosphorus had ignited and faded to a rosy, shifting glow. A few moments later, a blast of thermal air struck him in the face and made him grin painfully. The tape camera in his jacket swung and bounced as he tried to back up faster. The pipe was picking up heat from the face explosion and fire that was raging somewhere above him. The way the handle of a skillet picks up heat from the gas ring. Richards had no urge to be baked down here like a potato in a Dutch oven. Sweat rolled down his face, mixing with the black streaks of odour already there, making him look like the waxing and waning glow of the reflected fire, or in the waxing and waning glow of the reflected fire, like an Indian painted for war. The sides of the pipe were too hot to touch now. Lobster-like, Richards humped backwards on his knees and forearms, buttocks rising to smack the top of the pipe at every movement. His breath came in sharp, dog-like gasps. The air was hot and full of the slick taste of oil, uncomfortable to breathe. His headache surfaced within his skull and began to push daggers into the back of his eyes. I'm going to fry in here. I'm going to fry. Then his feet were suddenly dangling in the air. Richards tried to peer through, but his legs to see what was there, but it was too dark behind, and his eyes were too dazzled by the light in front. He would have to take his chance. He backed up until his knees were on the edge of the pipes, ending, and then he slid them cautiously over. His shoes were suddenly in water, cold and shocking after the heat of the pipe. The new pipe ran at right angles to the one Richards had just come from, and it was much larger, big enough to be to stand in and bend over. The thick, slowly moving water came up to his ankles. He paused for just a moment to stare back into the tiny pipe with the soft circle of reflected fire glow. The fact that he could see any glow at all from this distance meant that it must have been a very big bang indeed. Richards reluctantly forced himself to know that it would be their job to assume him dead or alive rather than dead in the inferno of the YMCA basement, but perhaps they would not discover the way he had taken until the fire was under control. That seemed a safe assumption, but it had seemed safe to assume that they would not trace him to Boston too. Maybe they didn't, after all. What did you really see? No, it had been them. He knew it. The hunters. They had even carried the odour of evil. It had wafted up to his fifth-floor room on invisible psychic thermals. A rat dog-paddled past him, pausing to look up briefly with glittering eyes. Richard splashed clumsily off after it in the direction that the water was flowing. Minus 67, and counting. Richard stood by the ladder, looking up, dumbfounded by the light. No regular traffic, which was something, but light. The light was surprising because it had seemed that he'd been walking in the sewers for hours, piled upon hours, in the darkness, with no visual input and no sound but the gurgle of water, the occasional soft splash of a rat, and the ghostly thumpings in the other pipes. What happens if someone flushes a John over my head? Richards wondered morbidly. His sense of time had been utterly destroyed. Now, looking up at the manhole cover some 15 feet above him, he saw that the light had not yet faded from the day. There were several circular breather holes in the cover, and the pencil-sized rays pressed coins of sun on his chest and shoulders. No air cars had passed over the cover since he had gotten here, only an occasional heavy ground vehicle and a fleet of Honda cycles. It made him suspect that more by good luck and the law of averages, um, at, and by inner sense of direction, that he had managed to find his way to the core of the city, to his own people. Still, he didn't dare go up until after dark. To pass time, he took out the tape camera, popped in a clip, and began recording his chest. He knew the tapes were, quote, fast light, i.e., able to take advantage of the least available light, and he did not want to give away too much of his surroundings. He did no talking or capering this time. He was too tired. When the tape was done, he put it with the other exposed clip. He wished he could rid himself of the nagging suspicion, almost certainly, that the tapes were pinpointing him. There had to be a way to beat it. Had to. He sat down sordidly on the third rung of the ladder to wait for dark. He had been running for nearly 30 hours. Minus 66 and counting. The boy, 7 years old, black, smoking a cigarette, leaned closer to the mouth of the alley, watching the street. There had been a sudden, slight movement in the street where there had been none before. Shadows moved, rested, moved again. The manhole cover was rising. It paused and something, eyes, glimmered. The cover suddenly slid aside with a clang. Someone, or something, the boy thought with a trace of fear, was coming out of there. Maybe the devil was coming out of hell to get Cassie, he thought. Ma said Cassie was going to heaven to be with Dickie and the other angels. The boy thought it was bullshit. Everyone went to hell when they died, and the devil jabbed them in the ass with pitchforks. He had seen a picture of the devil in the books Bradley had snuck out of the Boston Public Library. Heaven was for push freaks. The devil was the man. It could be the devil, he thought as Richard suddenly boosted himself out of the manhole and leaned for a second on the seamed and split cement to get his breath back. No tail, no horns, not red like in that book, but the mother looked crazy and mean enough. Now he was pushing the cover back, and now, holy Jesus, he was running toward the alley. The boy grunted, tried to run, and fell over his own feet. He was trying to get up, scrambling and dropping things, and the devil suddenly grabbed him. Don't stick me with it, he screamed in a close-throated whisper. Don't stick me with no pitchfork, you some bitch. Shh, shut up, shut up. The devil shook him, making his teeth rattle like marbles in his head, and the boy shut up. The devil peered around in an ecstasy of apprehension. The expression on his face was almost farcical in his extreme fear. The boy remembered the comical fellows on the game show Swim the Crocodiles. He would have laughed if he hadn't been so frightened himself. You ain't the devil, the boy said. You'll think I am if you yell. I ain't gonna, the boy said contemptuously. What, you think I want to get my balls cut off? Jesus, I ain't even big enough to come yet. My goodness. I apologize. I wouldn't have said. It's not spelt that way. You know a quiet place we can go? Don't kill me, man. I ain't got nothing. The boy's eyes, white in the darkness, rolled up at him. I'm not going to kill you. Holding his hand, the boy led Richards down the twisting, littered alley and into another. At the end, just before the alley opened out to an air shaft between two faceless high-rise buildings, the boy led him into a lean-to, built of uh, scrounged boards and bricks. It was built 4 feet, and Richards banged his head going in. The boy pulled a dirty swatch of black cloth across the opening and filled it with something. A moment later, a weak glow lit their faces. The boy had hooked a small light bulb to an old cracked car battery. I gave the battery myself, the boy said. Bradley told me how to fix it up. He's got books. I got a nickel bag too. I'll give it to you if you don't kill me. You better not. Bradley's in the stabbers. You kill me, he'll make you shit in your boot and eat it. I'm not doing any killings, Richard said impatiently. At least, not little kids. I ain't no little kid. I kept that fucking battery myself. The look of injury forced a dented grin to Richard's face. All right. What's your name, kid? I ain't no kid. Then sulkily, Stacy. Okay, Stacy. Good. I'm on the run. You believe that? Yeah, you on the run. You didn't come out of that manhole to buy dirty postcards. He stared speculatively at Richards. You a hunky? Kinda hard to tell with all that dirt. Stacy, He broke off and ran a hand through his hair. When he spoke again, he seemed to be talking to himself. I gotta trust somebody, and it turns out to be a kid. A kid? Hot Jesus, you ain't even 6, boy. I'm 8 in March, the boy said angrily. My sister Cassie's got cancer, he added. She screams a lot. That's why I like it here. Give that fucking battery myself. You want a toke up, mister? No, and you don't either. You want $2, Stacy? Christ, yes. Distrust lit over his eyes. You didn't come out of no manhole with $2 fucking. That's bullshit. Richards pulled out a new dollar and gave it to the boy. He stared at it with awe. It was close to horror. There's another one in it if you can bring your brother, Richards said, and seeing his expression, added swiftly, uh, I'll give it to you on the side so he won't see it. Bring him alone. Won't do no good to try and kill Bradley, man. He'll make you shit in your boot and eat it, I know. You run and get him. Wait until he's alone. $3. No. Listen, man, for $3 I can get Cassie some stuff at the drug, and then she won't scream so fucking much. The man's face worked as if someone the boy couldn't see had punched him. All right, 3. New dollars, the boy persisted. Yes, for Christ's sake, yes. Get him. And if you bring the cops, you won't get anything. The boy paused, half in, half out of the little cubbyhole. You stupid if you think I'd do that. I hate them fucking oinkers worse than anyone, even the devil. He left, a 7-year-old boy, with Richard's life in his grubby, scabbed hands. Richards was too tired to be really afraid. He turned off the light, leaned back, and dozed off. -65, and counting. Dreaming sleep had just begun when his tight-strung senses ripped him back to wakefulness. Confused, in a dark place, the beginning of the nightmare held him for a moment, and he thought some huge police dog was coming for him, a terrifyingly organic weapon, 7 feet high. He almost cried out loud before Stacy made the real world fall back into place by hissing. If he broke my fucking light, I'm gonna... The boy was violently shushed. The cloth across the entrance rippled, and Richards turned on the light. He was looking at Stacy and another boy. The new fellow was maybe 18, Richards guessed, wearing a cycle jacket, looking at Richards with a mixture of hate and interest. A switchblade clicked out and glittered in Bradley's hand. If you're healed, drop it down. I'm not. I don't believe that. He broke off and his eyes widened. Hey, you're the guy off in the freebie. You offered the YMCA on Huntington Avenue. Or you offed the YMCA on Huntington Avenue. The lowering blackness on his face was split by an involuntary grin. They said you fried 5 cops. That probably means 15. He come out of that manhole, Stacy said importantly. I knew he wasn't the devil right away. I knew he was some honky some bitch. You gonna cut him, Bradley? Just shut up and let man talk. Bradley came the rest of the way inside, squatting awkwardly, and sat across from Richards on a splintery orange crate. He looked up at the blade in his hand, seemed surprised it was still there, and then closed it up. You're hotter than the sun, man, he said finally. That's true. Where you gonna get to? I don't know. I've got to get out of Boston. Bradley sat in silent thought. You ought to come home with me and Stacy. We gotta talk, and we can't do it here, too open. All right, Richard said wearily. I don't care. We go way back. The pigs are cruising tonight. Now I know why. Or we go the back way. When Bradley led the way out, Stacy kicked Richard sharply in the shin. For a moment Richard stared at him, not understanding, and then remembered. He slipped the boy $3 new, and Stacy made it disappear. And we'll leave it there for tonight. I watched The Running Man recently, the Schwarzenegger film, and it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the book. That was quite funny. Even you know, the intrepid young adult books that eventually make their way onto film that are horrifically awful adaptations, you know the ones, are still fairly true to their books, with maybe the exception of the sequel to The Maze Runner. Um, but yeah, and I must say, it's not a bad choice. I liked having all their wee themed stalkers. It was very good. And it's funny that Richards was forced into it in the movie, but here he is, a willing participant in the book. Uh, Funny the wee changes they made, and by wee changes I mean literally everything about it, pretty much. But I'd watch it again. I recommend it. The first time I'd watched it must have been single digits, which was a very long time ago. But I remembered quite a bit of it, so it left an impression anyway. But thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.